Are you saying that Saudis can get to exactly where they need to get without the consultants if they were left without consultants?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
By the way, dishing out slides and the number of slides for me is not a measure of competence.
But you used it. I mean, that's very telling that you used it as the example of productivity.
I have the advantage of having known you for more than 20 years. So I've known you since we were friends in the neighborhood, Bilhara.
Correct.
Then you came to ABS. We jammed together in a band, which was pretty fucking awesome, by the way.
That was awesome. Those were good days. Good times.
Those were good days.
Yeah.
I was just listening to Metallica earlier. If you are doing something that you are good at, you're skilled at, and the challenge that of the task that you're good at is high, then you're in a state of flow.
Yeah.
So if you're doing something that is challenging, but your skill is low, then it's anxiety. Because you're anxious, because you're trying to do something hard. You're trying to do something difficult. You don't even know where to get started.
There's another angle to that, also from another book, the name of which escapes me. I think it's called something Fire, State of Fire, something, where he's kind of giving examples of different forms of state of flow. So one is like, playing in a band. The other is like a special forces team. Like they can intuitively read each other, and so when they're on a mission, they're all in a state of flow where they're completely in tune with each other.
Yeah.
So there's kind of different forms. You can have a conversation when you're in a total state of flow. Also, when you have an intuitive give or take.
Yeah.
So it all, to your point, I think it all becomes highly intuitive and natural rather than you're not thinking about it, because while it may be challenging, it's coming naturally to you, and you're bouncing that off the person or people you're together with.
That we can do the traditional cheers. Good to have you back.
Cheers.
Second appearance.
Nice to be back.
Second appearance on podcast with Salat Tabba was a second appearance.
Yeah, well, this is like the third appearance, but we're not airing the last one, though.
Actually, so there's a lot of, it's unfortunate.
Like,
wait, hold on, there's a lot of Metallica music playing.
Keep it's part of the ambiance.
That's good. I have the music of the actual podcast playing. No, it's fine. We're going to kill it completely, unfortunately. Or we can keep it in the ambiance. But
you think about it.
First time trial. You want to do it? We can actually like line it in, basically. We can Bluetooth it in and have it playing in the background. You want to do that?
You like line it in?
Yeah, like I'll Bluetooth my music to channel 3 and have it, and then we'll have to put our headphones on in that case so we can hear how loud we are. You want to do that?
لا خلاص خليها هيك.
Because I think we should be able to filter it out afterwards.
Too much.
Okay, well then, in this case, let's start over.
Right.
Cheers, Khaled.
Cheers.
Great to have you back.
Nice to be back again. The second, what is it called? Second time.
You didn't drink after the cheers. That's about you're managing hundreds of millions of dollars of assets under management. You can't risk bad luck, my friend.
Yeah.
You are, as we were saying, you are the second appearance on podcast, Talal being the first, but you were saying earlier that actually...
This is my third, but the second time appearance we're keeping offline because I think we went a bit overboard. Little bit overboard.
I don't think we went overboard. In fact, I think we're going to revisit quite a few of the topics that we discussed, unfortunately. The reason I think that episode was probably the biggest reason.
It was fun, though.
It was fun. Actually, I'm going to have to keep my phone around me in case I need to pull up some notes for today's discussion. I should have my iPad with me, but this will do. Because I do want to discuss some of the things we discussed last time, but... before I actually get into that, الفكرة هي إنه and actually, by the way, I have to say something before we get started.
Yeah, go for
it. You
didn't
ask me about my glasses because that's probably the first time you see me wearing glasses.
Is it?
In 20 years since you've known me.
But I have a memory of you in glasses, but maybe it's like I'm...
Maybe because you saw my last 2 episodes.
Possible, or I'm channeling you from 30 years ago. Also possible.
You should know that I bought 3 pairs of blue light glasses from Iowa.
Excellent. I'm very happy.
That's
awesome. Keep on buying them, and
which I understand.
Everybody go out and buy Iowa.
Are your glasses from Iowa?
No.
See, this is exactly. I was hoping that was going to be your answer, so that I can get you started on a flustered, because you're too calm and composed in most of your podcasts.
Hard to get me flustered. You have to try very hard to get me flustered.
Bro, you gotta buy your glasses from your portfolio companies. They're amazing. By the way, they're really cool.
I just don't. I haven't found one that works with my like face shape somehow.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But I have
tried them. I do have a pair of sunglasses from them.
Okay, so
yeah, but not my spectacles.
All right, cool. I know they are actually, and I am not sponsored by Iowa for this episode, but Georgia, who you met, and myself, collectively we bought 5 glasses from Iowa.
Yeah.
I think, aside of the fact that they're, again, I'm not shilling it just because it's your company, but I love that it's a local company that will give you just as good a glasses as the ones that you would buy from Ray-Ban or whatever, and I actually think the price advantage is a big
significant price point,
but it's actually a little too low. Like I think there's a room to increase the price for the glasses.
I mean, like I mean, not to go too deep in the business, but like what's so cool about that company is that basically, and I think it's like it reflects on a lot of what happens in our part of the world, and we consume a lot of imports, right? We don't make stuff here locally, especially in the Gulf, in the GCC. One thing is that everyone's focused on luxury, ultra luxury. Everyone's looking at that high end because that's the presupposition of what we want to consume in the Gulf. And so everything in the middle is just abandoned. It's just like totally ignored.
Yeah, especially in this part of the world.
Yeah. So these guys said, you know what? We can compete price for quality in that middle segment, deliver like a great product at a great price, similar qualities, like you said, like Ray-Ban or something like that. At like 40-50% cheaper while making like an amazing margin, and they're just like killing it, absolutely killing it.
Are they scaling outside of the region, or
for now they're just like I mean, there's so much to be done here. I mean, they're in over 100 stores.
Also, because I did go to their store in one of the malls, but I made my orders online too. So for me, I thought one of their cost saving initiatives is that they are an online mostly with 1 or 2 physical stores type of play, but they have locations across.
Mostly they're mostly in Saudi, but they do have locations. They have one Mall of the Emirates. They have a number in the UAE actually.
Very cool. Well, there are blue light glasses because with spotlights from the studio on, it affects my sleep, and so a little bit of a health tip for anyone that is suffering with sleep like I do. Blue light glasses from Iowa, not from anywhere else, because they're all shit.
You heard it here first. You heard it here for Iowa only.
No, but blue light glasses in general, but certainly from Iowa, because they're just as good for a fraction of the price, is a great way to deal with insomnia. And they've been helping me get sleepier. So,
really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it works.
I've never had like blue light glasses actually.
Did you have any issues with insomnia ever?
No.
Are you always on your phone before you sleep in bed?
Yes, but I've not had this issue yet. But maybe it's probably good for me. But get better sleep.
That's what I told you. You're too calm. You're too composed. You've always been. And one of the things that I think I can say since I've known you for 20 years that you have always been
more than 20 years.
More than 20 years actually, since we were like
pushing
15,
30
14. Yeah, is that you are obviously a very smart man. But most people in the world, in the internet world or in Dubai, they know you as a VC.
صح.
You are a VC, obviously.
Yeah. Guilty as charged.
Yeah, and but I, of course, have the advantage of having known you for more than 20 years. Yeah. So I've known you since we were friends in the neighborhood, Bilhara.
Correct.
Then you came to ABS. We jammed together in a band, which was pretty fucking awesome, by the way.
That was awesome. Those were good days. Those
were good days. Yeah. I was just listening to Metallica earlier. And then we stayed friends and we kept in touch and so on and so forth. So there was this rumor even at one point, because you were so smart even back in high school, that was the rap that people had about Khaled Talhouni, is that you're very smart, like you're a genius, and they weren't wrong.
I don't think I'm a genius.
There was one rumor / maybe a fact that you had memorized a dictionary at some point.
That's interesting, because like firstly, that's not I did not do that, and number two, that's not a sign of genius. That's just a sign of like a very sad person, which I like to think I'm not.
Well, you're at least very well read.
Yeah, I love words. I love words. I love like how like a turn of phrase can like change the course of anything from a conversation to history. And like I'm in love with words, especially like English. Like I feel, I know my native language is actually Arabic.
Yeah.
Yes, I gravitate.
Because both your parents are Arab, right?
Yeah. But I gravitate. I find English such an easy language to kind of to kind of harness in a way.
Yeah.
And like I do enjoy reading and words in general.
Yeah. And so you've been you're well read, you've been exposed to different industries, traveled the world, studied abroad, and yet I feel like a very limited version of you that is what most individuals that converse with you bring you into is the venture capital, because you're actually a really good VC as well, and between Wamda
I think remains to be seen, but in
early
days.
It is your career path, and you're one of the few who can talk intelligently about it. But because today is one of those episodes where I get to have the advantage of having known you from before.
Exactly, yeah.
And actually, I feel like every time you and I go for a chat, it takes longer than what we scheduled for, and I leave those chats usually feeling enlightened, inspired, curious about certain things.
And we rarely talk about like tech or stuff. I mean, sometimes we do, but it's usually like it just we have like a stream of consciousness
100%.
Stuff.
So for today's episode, we may touch on VC and all that stuff, and maybe regurgitate a lot of the questions and answers that you keep getting in conferences and podcasts. But I do have a couple of things that I really want to talk to you about, because we both used to play the guitar. We used to be in a band. And I recently, I think it shows in the shot, have been gifted a handpan. You know what a handpan is?
Yeah. That's awesome.
By Georgia for my birthday. I'm very grateful for it. And it was the first time that since I've learned how to play the guitar, that I actually sat with a guy who taught me how to play D minor, because that's tuned for a D minor. A handpan is tuned.
You can tune a handpan? Doesn't come pre-tuned?
It comes pre-tuned to one scale.
Yeah.
So this is scaled to D minor, and most handpans are. They just add octaves to them and so on. And it felt incredible to sit down and like just play basic like octave, like just da 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 da, like, and then like taking it to chords and then adding percussions and rhythms. The first question I want to ask you, and this has elements of Basil Abu Rub that's in my head right now, and Rick Rubin, who I admire and love, Rick Rubin obviously, is to what extent have you, as a professional in Dubai and a busy professional in venture capital, left room for creativity in your day-to-day life, and to what extent do you feel like you miss it? And if you have not left any room for it, like most of us don't, because we just get so caught up with life, do you feel like it's something that you may want to give importance to it almost as much as a DD for a prospect startup?
Yeah. So like, I think it comes for me in waves over the past, like since leaving high school. In high school, I used to play guitar or play music, an hour to 2 hours a day, doesn't matter, come rain or shine. Then after high school, I think it's sort of come in waves, like I said. So I'll go through periods when I'm playing like an hour to 2 hours a day, and then I'll go like a year not touch a guitar or not touch anything really at all. So right now I'm in one of those kind of troughs where I'm not doing anything.
How long has it been?
It's been maybe a year. No, less. It's been like 7-8 months maybe.
Okay.
But I think I'm due for a resurgence. And the cool thing is because you lose your satisfaction with playing an instrument comes from the better you get at it. So once you're out of practice, there's this sort of relearning curve in a way. You're kind of brushing off cobwebs. You're trying to kind of like get back, because it's all finger memory, right?
Sure,
because we're not. I never really kind of studied music theory properly, so I don't really know it.
Me too.
It's all just really like it's just memory, right? Muscle memory. So
Hotel California.
It takes a while to come back, and then it starts becoming intuitive. Like the scales become a bit intuitive. And then you hit that peak when you're at this kind of functional level where you can play along to almost anything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And then what happens, I think, is you sort of lose that muscle memory because you've left it for a week because you're traveling for work or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like a negative cycle where, I still need to, I've got to learn it. Oh, okay, now I'm not going to play.
Yeah.
So I think I've been in that sort of cycle, and I think I'm due for an upswing again.
Yeah, because I suppose, and correct me if I'm wrong, that even before the last 7-8 months, let's say in your early 30s, you weren't how frequently were you jamming?
Like there was a time me, Khaled Jabali, and Kareem Misrat, we were playing like, reasonably frequently, like at least once a month.
Yeah.
And I was playing alone like weekly, if not more, if not twice, 3 times a week. And then we'd kind of, not either individually or as a group, we'd stop jamming. I think we're due as a group to jam together again, for sure. And individually, I need to get back into it. The other amazing thing is playing in a group versus playing alone.
Yeah,
is it's much easier to enter a flow state, especially with people like you know and have like an ease with and trust.
Yeah.
So you enter into this sort of state where you can predict what your other bandmates are going to do. Because when we jam, we just jam. We're not like, there's nothing preset. It's just, but there is that, you start feeling each other out, and then
almost
you get
like
to
improvisation.
It's all improvisation. There's no like, oh, let's play this song now. Like we don't do that.
Yeah.
And so because we've known each other such a long time, is once we hit the flow state, it's like, and it lasts for like a few minutes at a time. It's just magic. It's absolute magic.
You know what?
And then it goes away, and then you kind of find it again.
This podcast for me, or in general, the idea of doing a podcast is that, because I often have friends that are known, and then I have strangers, and I got to keep the show going because I'm the host.
Sure.
And of course, it helps when the guest helps carry the show with me, the episode. But it's my form of adding creativity into my day, because what I do for a living is something that I don't necessarily enjoy, but I'm good at it and it makes money. But I endure what I do for a living instead of enjoy what I do for a living. Like that's the true fact, And I've accepted it. But the only way I've come to terms with it is by adding things in my day that fulfill me. The podcast obviously is one of them, because I enjoy nothing more than having a chat with somebody that I either have common interests with, or we disagree on things and we can have a debate, which brings you here today, because we can have both of these things, right? Yeah.
You need a creative outlet.
In general, that state of flow that you spoke about earlier, there is a framework for it, actually. We spoke about it, me and Basil, once when we were talking about Laith Khouri being previously a great guitarist. Laith Khouri, our classmate.
I think he still is a great guitarist.
He still is. Yeah. But like you, he was maybe, you and Laith in our class of 2003 were probably the top 2 guitarists in terms of dexterity. And just
he was far better than me. He was,
I mean, maybe he couldn't play the guitar behind his neck the way you used to play.
That's my special skill.
That included mobility and flexibility, but no, he was crazy on the guitar
playing.
Yeah. But then we once kind of maybe unsolicitedly is unsolicitedly a word?
Unsolicited. Yes,
unsolicitedly psychoanalyzed how like Laith was such a good he had such good hand eye coordination. That's what made him a great guitarist, and today he's a neurosurgeon.
They are interrelated.
And then the state of flow, which is there's a whole book about it by some guy from Yugoslavia or something like that, which basically is a 2x2 matrix that talks about how if you are doing something that you are good at, you're skilled at, and the challenge that of the task that you're good at is high, then you're in a state of flow. So if you're doing something that is challenging, but your skill is low, then it's anxiety, because you're anxious, because you're trying to do something hard. You're trying to do something difficult. You don't even know where to get started. And similarly, if you're doing something that you're very good at, but the task is very easy, then it's boring. So the upper quadrant of that 2x2, we can pull it up at some point, is try to do things where you're good at them and the challenge is high, and then that's the state of flow.
There's another angle to also from another book, the name of which escapes me. I think it's called something fire, state of fire, something, where he's kind of giving examples of different forms of state of flow. So one is like, playing in a band. The other is like a special forces team. Like they can intuitively read each other. And so when they're on a mission, they're all in a state of flow where they're completely in tune with each other. So there's kind of different forms that you can have a conversation when you're in a total state of flow. Also when you have an intuitive give or take. So it all, to your point, I think it all becomes highly intuitive and natural, rather than you're not thinking about it. Because while it may be challenging, it's coming naturally to you, and you're bouncing that off the person or people you're together with, whether it's a band or whether it's a conversation, whether it's like a special forces mission, whatever it is.
It's interesting.
And people are trying to always recreate that.
You
state
gravitate
of flow
towards it, basically. Is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and everyone wants to try to recreate it because you feel so fulfilled when you're in that state of flow.
The thing is creativity. So there's flow on the one hand, which you can. An accountant can be in a state of flow.
They can be. Right? Just totally hyper focused on whatever they're doing.
But so I think there is some mutual exclusivity to flow and creativity, because creativity and by the way, creativity is usually misinterpreted, because when you say creativity, people think singers, actors, artists, and they're not wrong. These are creative people.
Forms of creativity.
They're forms of creativity, but the ones that are other forms of creativity that don't really usually fall under the cliche definition of creativity are things like entrepreneurship, are things like putting something together or an event together, organizing a nice dinner for your friends and making a special meal.
100% cooking, like whatever, like it's all.
And I find that we all, especially in Dubai and other kind of urban, high octane cities, New York, London, غيرهم, we get so busy with our day-to-day lives, which for most people is like they're doing what they're doing to earn. They have to like accept the flaws of the system so they can survive the system. We discard the importance of creativity. And then I go to some of our friends like Basil Abarrub, and Basil Abarrub, with all the kind of joys and stresses of his life, he keeps on inspiring me, because you go to his room and he's got this crazy keyboard with all his like monitor speakers and his Ableton, whatever. And he's making a song that maybe,
and he's been working on it for a while, and
sure, a while, man, hours per day for days. And then he'll share it with like a couple of his friends and put it on SoundCloud, and he's so fulfilled. And I just realized how it's important to remember, and this is also coming from Rick Rubin, who I've been following. I love this guy. For anybody who doesn't know Rick Rubin, he's like a producer who's been who worked with pretty much every single great artist in the world
in the past 30 years.
In the last 30 years, right?
Basically,
And he's all about the importance of creativity, but not creativity like just in the general sense, but the process of creativity, regardless of the outcome. Like just the process of building something alone or with somebody else.
Yeah.
If I was just curious to know, to what extent do you feel like you sit and wonder when you have the capacity about whether you want to introduce that or dedicate capacity of your life, given that you are a married man running a venture capital firm. It's hard to actually slot in room for any form of creativity, but I find it personally to be really enriching.
I think it's critical, and للأسف I don't find it enough time for it, whether it's music or otherwise. I'd like to write more because I like writing. I'm not necessarily that good at it, but I can enter that state of flow when I'm writing, even if I'm writing an article that's work related, but it's I like writing, and I like reading and writing. So those kind of mesh together in a form of creative output.
And you blog when you write, so you post them as blogs in your.
If I do it for work, yes. But I'd like to write essays more, non-fiction essays,
unrelated to work.
Yeah, I'd like to, but I don't find time. I do that. I don't really publish them. Sometimes I write, and I don't really do much with them.
Yeah.
But that's another outlet I'd like, because there's only so much hours in the day. Because the other outlet I found is just working out and I'll do that a lot. But then if you do that and you're working and you're there's just so many hours in a day.
صح. Working out, if not in a competitive social sport, hitting the gym is good and healthy and it should be done. But it's at a disadvantage compared to playing basketball with.
Because that's another when you enter a state of flow when you're playing in a team. Also,
absolutely. But since you're at the topic of how you enjoy writing about topics, especially if they, for example, with my podcast, I really talk very little, if at all, about my company and what I do, because it's an outlet for me to do something else.
Totally different, yeah.
And I know that you have had, at best, very controversial opinions about many things in life.
Sure.
All of them very well thought through and very substantiated by.
That's not entirely true. There a lot of it's just mostly reactionary. But you can say that. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first person to be reactionary about some of those topics. We all are. At least you're honest about it. But one of the other things that, again, most people on LinkedIn and in Leap conferences or whatever don't know about you is that you have some very interesting perspectives on a bunch of things that are going on in the world. I think some of the first few instances that I've had in life learning about the different philosophies of economics from Adam Smith to communism and everything in between was probably a conversation with you in high school. I don't know if it was then or afterwards. And not to get into too many, there's just so many topics we can cover in one episode on the podcast.
Yeah.
But so the way I was thinking about how I want to kind of give you the opportunity and us the chance to discuss the state of the world that we're in right now. You are a capitalist, obviously, because you are a venture capitalist.
Sure, it's in the clues in the title.
Yeah. Well, but I don't know to what extent you've come, because a lot of us sometimes we have to fully or partially sell our soul to the devil, knowing that there are flaws in some of the systems. When maybe we prefer. I think you may have been a communist by ideology at one point.
Yeah, I think I went way on that. I had that kind of persuasion long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am a capitalist as well, so if it helps. But one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you is with everything you're seeing going around, politically, socioeconomically, from the startups that you've seen to the founders, who maybe, I don't know if we're going to get the chance or if we should even dive into the whole Palestine-Israel situation, then no. It would not do it justice to talk about it for just 5 minutes.
No, probably not.
But so let me ask you more broadly, what are some of the things that today you find yourself thinking about a lot outside of VC and the evaluations?
Yeah, so on that spectrum, like an ideological kind of quasi-philosophical spectrum, early in the podcast go down that rabbit hole, but I think one thing is, you mentioned like capitalism, communism, all these. So these frameworks of thought are really, born out of 18th century Enlightenment. So just to take stock of that for a second, these are ideas that are born between 200 to 250 years ago, with the advent of industrialization, etc. So you had these kind of different modes of thought emerge from it. What's very interesting for me is that, and you have the spectrum, right? On the right, you have extreme capitalism. On the left, you have, Marxism, communism, whatever it is. And then they somehow kind of meet together in some form of
socialism,
anarchism, basically, whether it's, libertarian anarchism or communist anarchism, whatever it is. But
socialist systems,
they
perhaps?
sort of kind of meet. There's kind of horseshoe theory. But what's very interesting is these kind of modes of thought are, if nothing else, quite outdated, right? They're over 200 years old. They're born out of a world that was rapidly transforming economically, socially, politically. And this is how you had all these ideologies kind of come together, whether it's, like I said, on the liberal side, which was capital L liberalism, John Stuart Mill into Adam Smith, whatever, all of that stuff, or on the kind of more kind of left-wing side, whether that's, Marx, Engels, etc. And somewhere Nietzsche flows underneath that in some odd way. So I think we are getting to a new point where you're approaching this kind of new inflectionary moment where, some economic innovation, in the same way in the industrial era or industrialization changed everything. I think we're starting to approach that sort of inflectionary moment. I think AI plays a big role in that, but I think a lot of things are changing. The idea of identity, national identity, is, buttressing up against modernity, is in conflict with modernity and globalization, for lack of a better word. I think that's why you see a lot of kind of right-wing reactionary movements, why you also have on some level, a push towards kind of more socialist ideas, because, the world is economically disjointed.
A move away from globalization as well.
I think there is a move towards deglobalization, because it has failed. It's not that it's failed people, because everyone is generally richer today. I mean, one of the oddest things is that, we're going in a bit of a circle and I'm rambling a bit, but bear with me.
I'm keeping up with you.
I'll get there
Despite
somewhere.
Despite my ADHD, I'm keeping up with you.
I'm going to get there somewhere. I think today, basically, there's there's this perception that the world is worse than it was 50 years ago or 60 years ago. I think almost you ask anybody, or most people in your social circle, even well-to-do, they'll say, things are not as great as our parents had it or our grandparents had it. But by every measurable metric, whether that's income per capita, health span, or
literacy rate,
everything, you name it, I think the world on average and en masse, actually, in the past 50 years has undergone like a crazy transformation. Almost everyone crazy improvement. Like, it's just shocking. Yeah. The level, we've lifted a couple of 2 billion people out of poverty in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, but nobody feels like that. Nobody feels, I think we're all in some kind of form of personal crisis, right? We all feel that. And because there's that sense of that, and we can argue as to why we feel that, there is this, we're not objectively looking at the fact that we are much, much better off. But we feel like we're not better off, especially relative to previous generations. And this is across the developed and developing world. Like, this is everywhere, almost everywhere. There is this clinging on to last century's big ideas, whether that's, quasi-fascist nationalism or, deglobalization, even older, like 19th century ideas like mercantilism, meaning economic nationalism, or kind of socialism, very kind of left-wing ideas. So people are pushing at the margins because the center, the ideological political center of liberalism has over-delivered. It's made everyone like better, but people don't feel that they're better and what are better off than their parents or grandparents were, on average. Obviously, there's some people who are worse off than it, but I think on the average, it's indisputable. People are much better off. So I think that is fueling a lot of disjointed movements in the world. I mean, you look at Europe, like the far right is kind of taken over, and I think continues to. I suspect
Brexit and غيرهم.
I think whether Brexit is like, is justified or not, I think there are good arguments to vote for Brexit. That's a separate kind of conversation. But I think there's a general move towards kind of more extreme movements, and or kind of national identity at some point on the right. So people are grasping to a sense of national identity where that's been eroded in a big way, or a sense of our culture and heritage. Even in the Arab world, we think a lot about the erosion of our culture and heritage. And, talk about Jordan, for example. They're always talking about that, politicians, You go back for a second. 100 years ago, there was no culture and heritage. Actually, like mensaf, like our national dish, for example, is a product of globalization. We don't grow rice in Jordan. We don't. There is no rice. There is no rice paddies in Jordan.
It's mostly about the yogurt.
But even so, like the concept of that dish is a product of globalization. Actually, if you want to dig into its kind of like its history, but again, too much down the rabbit hole. But I think like these old Enlightenment ideas are now of whether it's on the left or the right, like capitalism or liberalism writ large, or kind of more central-based planning, socialism, etc., like the critique of capitalism. I think they're past their sell-by date, and I think there is a need for an emergence for a new
world order,
not order, but philosophical toolkit to kind of make sense of the transformation that we are going through. That things like AI and rapid technological innovation is going to bring upon us.
Very curious. Okay, hold that thought, because I'm curious to understand how AI could do that. Because what I have arrived to as a conclusion when I try to describe myself, am I leftist? Am I rightist? Am I centrist? Am I progressive, liberal?
Doesn't fit.
Yeah, I'm definitely a little bit of some things and more of other things. I'm somewhere in the middle. So clearly, the idea of labels, depending if I'm talking about fiscal policy, social policy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So most people are now find themselves being pulled depending on where they stand religiously, socially, ila akhiri. I don't know how AI can solve for it. That's why I want to ask you that question. But what I know is, and I'm gonna sort of quote a guy who I started to hate more and more recently, was Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
Because Jordan Peterson also is a bit of a sellout, because there was a time when he was giving good advice, and some of his books, 12 Rules of Life, continues to be a great book. But then when he started being a complete sellout with like others on the internet, and other dark web influencers. So there's this like segment in the internet of dark web, Ben Shapiro's in it, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, وغيرهم. But yeah, let's not take a tangent. The war between right and left, conservatism and liberalism is a good war to have, because you need conservatism to keep things in check and families and values and not let things get out of hand. And that way, conservatism is good.
Sure.
And then, of course, too much of it means that you're not going to keep up. You become almost Amish, yani. So you need a little bit of liberalism, progressiveness, innovation, risk-taking, whatever, to move forward. And that endless battle between the two is where we move. And when we get too much ahead of ourselves, conservatism pulls us back. When we realize we're not keeping up with the world because others are ahead of us, then we we fuel it a bit more. And I think I like this notion. Alan Watts also kind of talks about it as well, more about good and evil. But
what you just described is like the basis of like the 18th century German philosopher Hegel, which is kind of thesis, antithesis leads to synthesis. Two opposite ideas when they combine lead to synthesis, and that is the major force of pushing history forward. And then Marx uses that as the cornerstone of his kind of thinking. But there is something to that. Forget Marx, but just the idea of like the synthesis of ideas is the driving force that underlies history moving forward. I think there's something very, very true to that.
So how is AI helping redefine what we now know as traditional?
Let me go back to like other moments in history that are the innovations that have kind of reshaped the world. So we can go back as far as like the birth of monotheism, but I think that's too far. Let's go to the 16th century and like the invention of the printing press, for example. The printing press directly led, I think, you can argue, to the
spreading of information.
Even before that, to the wars of Reformation and the Protestant Reformation, meaning the biggest single, one of the bloodiest wars that in the history of the world actually was the kind of the wars of the Reformation, because of the advent of Protestantism. Because historically, Christianity, which was the major Catholicism, which was the major religion in kind of Europe and wherever Christianity was in most of the world, was very centrally focused, meaning that the church, centralized church hierarchy, was the conduit of the people to God, right? Because nobody was literate, so nobody could read the scriptures, nobody could read the liturgy, nobody could read. So it was
just take the word of whoever.
You have the church controlled information. So the only people who were literate were mostly people in the church, right?
The elitists who would tell you what it is and take it as fact.
I mean, it's just the priest up to the bishop, up to the cardinal. Like this is how information got. And the scribes and the monks. I mean, what did monks do except like write? Right? They used to transcribe. With the advent of, because you couldn't write freely, so you needed a very small number of people who were literate enough to write. The printing press meant like, okay, now we can print 10,000 Bibles, en masse, or 100,000 Bibles, and all the liturgy, etc., and it's in different languages, right? Whereas before you could only produce a very small number of books because people had to rewrite them.
So translation,
and suddenly the word of God became
ubiquitous,
and so you didn't need the intermediary. It was easier for you to access the information directly because you can get a book, you can learn to read on your own. You don't need anybody. And that coincides perfectly with the Christian Reformation, with Martin Luther and kind of the revolution against the Catholic Church, leading to like a crazy reordering of the world, right? Like of at least the developed world at the time. So that's just the printing press, right? We talked about the Industrial Revolution, right?
Then there's the engine, the steam engine.
Exactly. That led to like a whole upending of almost all social order, and arguably leading to our new philosophical ideas, right? Whether it's capitalism, communism, whatever it is, left, right, etc., enlightenment, non-enlightenment, and a new way and urbanization, right? That up until that point, human beings never lived in like huge cities like that. There are few examples of it, London, Rome, but they're not many, right?
I think it really started with the Columbus migration to indigenous USA, and at the time, well, it wasn't called the USA at the time, indigenous America. That was real urbanization.
I mean, you suddenly had like massive urbanization all happening at the same time. So what AI does is this has the opportunity to have this kind of massively deflationary impact on the cost of labor. So, what the Industrial Revolution did was it made capital much more productive. So if you could buy a machine, that machine was suddenly so much more productive than what used to be. A machine used to be a till, right? Like as simple as that. Now you could build like a steam engine that could produce like, the textiles en masse, right? Before, your capex, your
you have
capital
to hire
investment.
20 people to push the thing.
Yeah, your capital investment was like 2 knits, right? You're knitting, like that was it. That was the two thing you're buying.
Yeah.
But if you bought the machine could produce what the sewing kit could do, like times 10,000.
You replaced OPEX with CAPEX and depreciation, basically.
And now it's the same. And now AI has what AI could do is do the same to OPEX, to labor, at a scale that's unimaginable.
Without depreciation.
Without depreciation, right? Like in theory, just the chipset.
Maintenance.
And exactly.
I mean, you got to maintain it.
So that means that the individual can become, the individual's labor can become infinitely more productive. So what does that mean? We don't know, really. Usually these technologies have disruption that has a dark side, which, like I said, the wars of the Reformation, the excesses of the Industrial Revolution, which, some of it's quite horrible, right? But the end results have been massively positive, right? So most likely AI will follow that. So what is the dark side? We're not really sure, but something's coming.
Unemployment, is one of them.
I think people think that, but there's usually when these kind of big technological paradigm shifts happen, there is some people who get unemployed, but overall, much more people get employed. It's just
like AI developers.
It's just something changes, unforeseen stuff. So, take like in 1901, what do you think was the most common profession in the Western world in 1901?
Some production lines and manufacturing.
Think again. It's the randomest thing.
I can't think of anything else.
It's domestic servant.
Oh, like butlers and stuff like that?
It's butler. It's like cook, cleaner, chimney sweep, whatever. Like that was the most common profession in the West. Like, look at how much that's kind of changed.
Yeah, but what was the job?
And before that was agriculture.
Yeah, okay. So the moment you started having chimneys, you needed somebody to clean the chimneys.
Exactly.
So now, though, if you're going to have AI, perhaps what will happen is, actually, now that I think about it, is that all those activities that AI can do, but for good or bad reason, and a real human will do better than AI. Maybe it's empathy, maybe it's all those things that AI will be limited with, suddenly emerge. I can't think what these things are.
So like I just saw.
But the one example that I can think of is the one that Naval Ravikant spoke about, I think, in his podcast with Joe Rogan, one of my biggest inspiring episodes to start my podcast, which is if AI ends up truly taking over jobs, and let's say there is no natural new opportunities for jobs to employ people, then immediately there will be a requirement for a universal basic income. And if that happens, then we're gonna all become creative. We're all gonna become entertainers. We're all gonna become creators, because money is not an issue, because we're getting UBI rather. Yeah. And suddenly, and that's Naval Ravikant's words, not mine, he sees a world with AI doing all the mechanical work. Humans now who were doing them no longer are needed.
No.
Unless a new segment of jobs opens up for them, the only thing left for them to do, other than kill themselves, is to become creators. Creator economies, stand-up comedians.
But it also lets you, if you want to enter the creative economy or the creator economy, AI gives you the toolkits where you could produce a whole movie with just your laptop. In the same way, but just times 1,000, where you no longer need a full studio to record music.
Sure.
You just need a laptop and a couple of good speakers. Whereas 40 years ago, you would need a fully kitted out studio.
Then it's about competing on the attention span of the consumer. Because then if you have like 50 movies being produced a day instead of one every week.
Let me give you the dark side, though. I would argue, and not for me to argue with Naval Ravikant, but it's all a matter of like time scale. So
he's not that smart, by the way. He is, but
he is quite smart.
He is smart.
No, he is quite smart.
They all have their limitations, like Chamath and the rest of them.
Yeah. So
anyway, to your point.
Let me give you both sides of this argument. So I'd argue that UBI is actually already here in much of the developed world in some form, in a limited form. So if you look at labor force participation, not unemployment. So what percentage, because unemployment is a measure of people looking for jobs, not finding jobs.
So
there's another measure, which is far more interesting, which is called labor force participation, meaning what percentage of the population is looking for a job? Because the minute you stop looking for a job, you're
out of that metric.
You're out of that metric. Yeah. So the unemployment figure doesn't really capture that. So if you look since I can't remember that year, I think it was the 1970 something, early 70s, I believe. In most of the developed world, almost all the developed world, labor force participation has been diminishing increasingly. So many people are just not working anymore.
Even though
of those that are able,
they can get a job, but they're choosing not to.
It's just those who are choosing, who are not working. This is hidden in things like disability, etc. But it can't be that in some countries, 1 in 3 people are disabled. It's just not possible. I mean, just anecdotally, you look around the street, 1 in 3 people are not disabled, right?
So they're getting enough subsidization.
So there's
from
enough.
The
government's already doing hidden forms of welfare and subsidies, whether it's direct, indirect,
and that's a bad thing.
Where people are dropping out of the labor force and they're just not kind of working. So the question to you is, and this is back to do people perceive themselves to be better off than they were 50 years ago? Are we in a golden age of creativity and cultural output and fulfillment and happiness and self-actualization compared to people in the 1960s? Are we there today, given that we have a form of UBI today? Actually, in Dubai and the Arab world is different. I'm talking about developed world because we're all moving in that direction. So the entire world is catching up to the developed world. We're all there in different ways, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's a great question because putting aside the injustices that are going on in certain parts of the world, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, or some of those major macro, on an individual level, self-actualization, and I've had this conversation recently with Aisha Shah, literally yesterday on the beach. That's why I have a tan ومقشر شوي وهيك. It seems like an elitist problem, and it is an elitist problem because to actually even get to the point where self-actualization, being the pinnacle of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, means that you've got
possibly
your life. Yeah, but it's actually it's a kind of thing that I by the way, this is related, that the highest suicide rate in the world is white men in their 40s in the US.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for self-actualization is not easy. So when you have welfare or some sort of subsidy programs, or when you feel like you've lived, and when you don't have adversity to deal with, it can be in some way debilitating, almost depressing, potentially suicidal. It's
purpose. I mean, people need purpose.
One of the reasons why some claim our parents had it better back then is because they had to make ends meet, and whatever time they had to take a break was to gather the family around for dinner, and then wake up and rinse and repeat, and life was good. They die feeling like they've provided for their families. They grinded it out.
Exactly. Adversity is a crucial part of the human condition.
Yeah.
And the transcendence of that adversity is what defines us. It's even in our evolutionary biology, because that's how our dopamine system works.
Yeah.
Meaning you need to have a bit of pain so that once you get pleasure, you can appreciate the pleasure. If you just get pleasure, you
deplete it.
You deplete it so that it doesn't work anymore. You're no longer happy. Whatever it is, whatever your dopamine hit is.
Whatever you're doing,
if you don't have pain against it, right? Adversity, challenge, struggle.
Yeah.
If you're not transcending it to get the dopamine hit, and you just get the dopamine hit, you're desensitized to the once you actually get the payday or whatever it is that you get.
So in some way, those who have it well in life, being that they are well off, well experienced, have money, kaza, they're not necessarily doing better than the ones before.
It doesn't matter whether I don't think it's a factor. It's a function of also wealth necessarily, because you can have people who are very wealthy who are miserable because they lack purpose, and you can have people who are very poor who are miserable because they lack purpose, and vice versa. And people who are poor,
but I think the ones who are miserable don't have the capacity to think about purpose. They just gotta make ends meet.
No, I think even when you're making ends meet doesn't mean purpose, right?
I know,
it doesn't necessarily, because if you
surviving is more important than finding purpose.
Because in a developed society, if let's say we're all aspiring that, nobody's gonna die of hunger. Nobody dies of hunger in actually, interestingly, in most of the world, nobody dies of hunger anymore. It's gone. I mean, that was unthinkable 60 years ago, 50 years ago. In our parents' lifetime, the idea that almost nobody on the planet can die of hunger.
Yeah.
Virtually nobody.
There are some very few places, I mean, Africa, there are people,
but these are limited in terms of the overall human population. It used to be like, in the 19th century, it used to be that at any moment, like 20-30% of the world might die of hunger at any second.
Yeah.
Like we no longer live like that.
Yeah.
And if you lose your job or you stop earning income, you're not going to die of hunger.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's probably not. Like I think anybody that, unless you're on the streets homeless in San Francisco, ironically, which is the most one of the most developed cities in the world by tech and innovation, had some of the shittiest like states of homelessness happens to be in LA and San Francisco.
Yeah.
Which is really ironic, by the way, because you would think they would be.
But that's just a function of decadence, because that's a policy. Not to go down that's another rabbit hole I can go down.
They just like opened the lid completely for liberalism to the point where like people lost themselves.
I mean, because that's looking at it through this clinging. You know how we talked about the far right clinging to an ideological worldview. This is the left clinging to an ideological worldview where. Homeless people are only homeless because of evil capitalism and people can't afford homes. And that literally like 3 or 4% of people homeless in San Francisco, for example, are homeless because they can't afford the rent. It's because they decriminalized like, sleeping on the street. They decriminalized like open drug taking.
Yeah.
Everyone got addicted to fentanyl because they don't want to criminalize like open drug taking because that disproportionately affects like black men.
Yeah.
And so therefore people are just like zombified. Have you seen the pictures of like what it looks like? People on the streets.
I've experienced having them approach me in the streets when I was living in San Francisco, and it was scary as fuck because they would be 80% naked, walking at you like zombies, high on bath salts, and you don't know, do I fight back? Do I walk away? I don't know what to do. Add to it all this gender. Let's not get into this gender dysmorphia or whatever. Let's not get cancelled depending on who's listening.
Can't get cancelled here. That's the beauty of it. Well, you can actually, but like
I just real quick before we go into this, I wasn't planning, unless you'd like to talk about the whole gender thing. Let's just say there is acceptable and unacceptable interpretations of this gender confusion thing, and the way that San Francisco they went about it perhaps was too extreme to the point where they've even manifested it. صف الواحد, if he's not part of a gender confusion category, then something's wrong with them. If they fully identify as males or females, it's almost like you're an outlier.
In the absence of, I think a few things are happening in the world. In the absence of adversity, that gives you a sense of purpose, real adversity, right? That when you overcome it gives you purpose. And relatedly, the dilution of religion, or what we constructed as religion, as like what religion functioned as, it gave you a higher purpose because it connected you to a wider community, especially the monotheistic religions, but religion in general.
Yeah.
So in their dilution, for whatever reason, they got diluted, plus the lack of kind of adversity leading to purpose. People are kind of finding that wherever they want, like they're kind of like, concocting new types of like odd religions that can be destructive, right?
Yeah.
So there's different kind of,
even at a micro level. Think about if you and your partner or your girlfriend have everything going well, you'll find yourself arguing about the stupidest things sometimes.
Exactly, yeah.
It's بس احنا, what's funny about our, you and I grew up in Amman, which is you have like a couple of thousand people who are super wealthy, and
let's say a couple of 100,000.
No,
at the time we were
about the super wealthy. The super wealthy are less than 100,000, right? I'm talking about like the ones that are like multi-millionaires, like the tycoons of Jordan.
Sure, yeah.
Forget about the ones who own land in the.
I would say like
in the desert of Jordan, the tribal ones. And you forget about them just because they're very wealthy by owning hectares of land in the desert of Jordan. العشائر وهدول.
Sure.
Let's talk about urban Amman. There is a couple of tens of thousands who are like money is never going to be an issue. Not only that, there is 3 generations.
Generational wealth.
Yeah. Then there is the middle class, very small one. relatively speaking, of course. And then there's a long tail of like the poverty, making hundreds of JDs a month to make a family live with. And in our own little bubble, which is ABS, you briefly discussed this, I think, with Yasmin and Nair.
Yeah.
Wonderful girl.
Favorite subject of mine. I love that podcast, by the way. I really like her podcast. She's such a great girl. She's awesome. Yeah.
By the way, I can't tell you how happy I am to have like seen her after 20 years, and for me, it was such a great chat. Can't wait to see her again. But you've touched on it a little bit with her. The socioeconomic disparity, even within our own ABS group, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you and I happen to be within our class of around 80-90 students, certainly not part of the super wealthy, and fortunate, and certainly not part of the making ends meet. We were somewhere in the middle, and I think it's a great place to be.
But there weren't many people who were like not making ends meet at that school, no?
But they were only the ones that were
on scholarship.
You were subsidized. Your mom was
my
teacher?
mom was teacher, yeah. So they didn't pay full tuition.
Well, and I would consider myself, even though I had no teachers, my parents were not teaching at the school, but I was also like relative to everybody else. The kid who.
I mean, there was a group of kids whose parents like said, I guess basically. They weren't, let's say, if you averaged out the incomes of the parents, there was definitely a group of kids of which I think we're part of that. The average income there was kind of much lower than the average.
Yeah.
Because I don't say income, but like wealth was much lower than average on balance but that their parents really believed in like getting the best possible education. Whatever the reason is, they were at that school. So there was probably a group like that.
I'm very grateful. I'm sure you are, because like the truth is, aside of having met great people and been around that socioeconomic segment, and having had one foot in the rich and famous and then other in Umadina, where you and I lived, which is actually a really nice place to live in. It just happens to have a weird mix of like public school students and whatnot. But
equal opportunity neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know how this neighborhood had this weird mix, but
a lot of Jordan urban Amman, because it grew so quickly. You had like, this was supposed to be this, then it became affordable housing. Like anyway, that's how that.
True.
Yeah.
But the reason the what I want to get at is the following. This is again maybe not the first time we talk about it. You wrote a very flamboyant, controversial email at the time after we all graduated from high school. Everybody in class of 2003 knows about that email because it went out to everyone.
I'm trying.
You ranted a little bit, you psychoanalyzed a little bit, and you gave your 2 cents, and then people read that email, and now we sit and laugh about
Slightly cringy.
No, sit and laugh about it because it was
funny.
You said something about being
reactionary. That is reactionary par excellence.
Fine. May that be the worst of reactionary things, because like I know I myself have had much more reactionary, cringy things that I've done in my life. So that's not the point I'm trying to get at. The point I'm getting at is a few months ago, we've had our 20-year reunion.
Yeah,
which was pretty cool.
It was very cool, actually. It was a lot of fun, actually.
It was a lot of fun.
And when we did our podcast that we're not publishing is right before that, right? In anticipation of that. I think so.
I wouldn't remember because I was still like in my most
sedated
states, yeah. But I had a question for you, which is, quantum leaping from 2003 and then taking a quantum leap to 2023, December, which is when we had our reunion.
Sure. Yeah.
Your thoughts about this your perspective on this whole thing before and after. Did you leave the reunion with any particular thoughts that you came back before you go to sleep, or maybe days later, that you thought were I didn't expect that, like some things have truly changed, and then maybe some other thoughts were like some things really never change. Did you feel like you left that reunion with any particular insights or thoughts that you thought for yourself were pretty interesting and maybe it caught you off guard or confirmed to you?
Wow, good question.
Did you expect any bad questions on podcasts?
No, that's a good question, actually. I think the overwhelming thing that struck me after, which was, in hindsight, shouldn't be surprising, but actually, surprised me a bit, and like I lingered on, was like firstly and foremost was, just it was such a good vibe. it was such a good sense of camaraderie, the right mixture of sort of foregone nostalgia with, you know, a good sense of like shared history, and this kind of like coming together, even though not everyone was there, like, but almost everyone. Like, it was a good number of people showed up.
About 60 people showed up.
I think so, yeah. It was around that.
Out of a total of 82.
Yeah. So that was overwhelming and like positive, that we have this kind of shared bond in a way, no matter how tenuous,
from where we left off.
No matter how tenuous that bond is, and it is there and it exists and it is real, and it was great to have it play out. And the way it plays out is we all somewhat, to some degrees, revert to our high school personas with each other, right? Like, and that's really interesting to watch. Even you and me, all of us, we all kind of go back to that kind of...
The class clown came
because we
in
all
as a class
evolve.
clown.
We all evolve. Whatever it is, the kind of like, whoever, different people have these different personas, and like we all kind of revert to them, even though we've all changed and grown and evolved. And,
kids,
for
divorced,
better or worse.
married. كل واحد فات.
For better or worse, we've all kind of changed. But that there is that. The other thing was so that was definitely there. The other thing that struck me is, and this is going to sound very, it'll sound a little bit like whimsical, but like you could kind of chart out you could look at different people's lives, right? And this is not good or bad. This is just, you know, and there's a series of decisions people make, small or large, that, you know, takes them on a certain journey. And you can't but wonder when you look at all your classmates, right? And you look at them and say, like, they did so and so and so. And sometimes you can pick out, even people you haven't seen in a while, you can pick out, you know, these are the 3-4 kind of consequential life decisions they made that, you know, took them to this place. And the place is there's no judgment on it. It's good, bad, this irrelevant. It's just, this took them there. But actually those kind of twists of fate are, but like, they're very small, but they kind of build on each other. And then you say, oh, so-and-so ended up here, but if so-and-so, that this could be totally different.
Sure.
And in seeing everyone who you've not seen in a long time in one place together, you sort of kind of understand that that's what kind of drives your life forward. And then it becomes self-reflective. So I start thinking,
what if I did this?
And I say, there's probably like 5-6 kind of decision. I don't call them decisions, but just crossroads, paths that, you know, where things branched out, where everything could have been different entirely. You know, there's no reversion to a mean. Like, I think, I you know, we like to think that we're on an arc and we all kind of bend, like that arc of history bends. You say the arc of history bends towards us, or your arc bends towards a certain direction.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. I think like there are infinitesimally small kind of little things that happen, and they kind of affect your entire life course in a very bizarre, strange way. And like being in that setting
where you can compare and contrast.
I don't know what happened then in that moment, but it just kind of I saw it in my own life. And I saw, like, you know, whether that's in, you know, where I live, what I do, you know, everything.
How others perceive me. You can't help but also think about what do people see when they see me versus how I know my life really is.
I don't really care about that. Like, I don't care how people perceive me or don't. But like, I mean, I do a little bit. Everyone does a bit. But it's more about like, I could have, if so-and-so coincidence happened.
Yeah.
What could have gone differently?
The butterfly effect.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. What if so-and-so, I did this 20 years ago, 15 years ago? Yeah, and I could see it in everyone's like branches. So, you know, like stupid movie example. I don't know, I just thought of it, but like Donnie Darko.
It's a movie.
It was an amazing movie. And you say when there's this kind of idea of predestination. So at some point in the movie, it's really weird sequence where...
Wait, that's a Johnny Depp Al Pacino one, right?
Is Al Pacino? No, that's.
But that's Donnie Brasco.
No,
Donnie Darko is the one with the rabbit mask.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Oh, that's also a great movie.
Yeah. And there's a sequence in the movie because really hard to follow, really weird.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah. Where like he kind of stands outside of time, the main character.
Sure.
But he's like looking at like his high school mates because he's in high school.
Yeah.
And there's like they're walking, and then in front of them there's a projection of these people, like their futures walking in front of them.
Yeah.
And he's trying to change their kind of, where they're going. So it's almost like that.
Yeah.
Like I could kind of see it like in...
You zoomed out.
I zoomed out. It was like
a space-time continuum.
Weird out-of-body experience for like a second. Looked at everyone. And then most importantly, I looked at, or I just like, oh, what about me? And I said, oh, if I interacted with this person so differently, even people in the room, I can see how...
Totally different life.
Entirely different.
And may I dare ask, was it like regret or just like an observation? Like, did you feel like this is a bit of a bold question, but I'm going to ask it anyway without having to get into details. Was it more of an observation of like how things could have been different, period? Or was it more of a what if this happened and I think it would have been great or bad, or like was it concluded with some sort of like prediction of outcome, positive or negative?
I think like when there is a lack of how do I put this? There's one layer where it doesn't matter. It's just curiosity. It's like what would have happened, but because the counterfactual, meaning the path you didn't take didn't happen.
Sure, you can never
there's
really
always
know.
regret because you don't know. So you kind of like, like in math, how you do like you there's a limit. Like you solve for the limit. So you're solving for the limit where it's most positive in your mind.
Yeah.
Right. So there is that, say like this interaction with this person or that person, or if I'd stayed in Amman, or I'd gone to university here, or I'd done this, or I'd done that, or I stayed,
It makes you wonder how much destiny is destiny versus how much you could have really been the person behind the steering wheel, or like how much can you control versus how much of it can you not.
But it's syncretic. They're both kind of like, again, that's full circle to our thesis and antithesis of Hegel, right? That's what those two forces is what propel your history forward, right? But there's a lot of that. Like a lot of that happened to me while like I was there, in after that, and it was nice seeing people I haven't seen in a long time. And I don't know. How do you feel?
I loved it. I mean, I first of all, I was really fucked off my ass, to be honest. I was really I had one too many drinks, and when I say one too many drinks, I mean 10 too many, whatever it was. But I enjoyed seeing everybody for a long time. I regret having drunk too much that day because I wish I remembered more of it, and I remember enough to remember that it was fun. But aside of my personal sobriety state at the time, which happened to be, by the way, at the climax of my like hitting rock bottom, but no, that's neither here nor there. I spoke about it briefly with my episode with Yasmin. I really enjoyed seeing seeing everyone to begin with, seeing the success that a lot of those people have achieved in their own versions of success that I also consider to be success. Khaled Talhouni, showing up with his beautiful wife, kids, he's a neurosurgeon in America. My God, this guy, incredible. You know what I mean? And also seeing some of those people from our class that have, in my opinion, may have burnt the bridge back to returning to normalcy without getting into names, and having actually managed to get back to normalcy. And I think there's at least 3 or 4.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you're talking about. And I think you're right.
There are 3 or 4 individuals that when they've experienced what they've experienced, we've all done mistakes in our lives. So, and there's no judgment here. But at the time it felt like that there's no path back for them. And somehow, back to your point on camaraderie, it seems like, and maybe it was a show and fake, and I don't know what people really think.
No, I think it was quite genuine. I think the feeling all round was heartfelt. I don't think it's fake.
And one thing I'll tell you what, Annie, to keep it positive and not to forcefully keep it positive, but I generally enjoy positive thoughts in general, is that time is forgiving. And
absolutely.
Maybe not fully forgiving, but with enough time, let us talk about a totally irrelevant example. Look at Louis C.K.
Sure, he got cancelled and
he got cancelled.
He's back now.
And you know what? People eventually forgave him for masturbating forcefully in front of some woman. That was his thing, right?
Yeah.
And 3 years later, he made a joke about it in his first special after he was back on stage, and then look, he's back on his feet.
He moved on.
And that's a pretty traumatic thing to especially if you're Louis C.K. with your belly sticking out and you're like fucking jacking off with a woman watching you. So to get back from that, is a pretty it's to show you how time is forgiving. It's not to say that go and like fuck life up and then expect them to forgive, but it was nice to see how humans have the capacity to forgive and forget, or to at least realize that we all have our own mistakes, we all make our own judgments. I had enjoyed seeing the 3 or 4 people that I thought made mistakes that were unforgivable be at least humored. I don't know to what extent their life is really
on a road to redemption, almost.
Yeah,
potentially.
I don't know to what extent they are, by the way, but
or are they redeemable? But that's a different topic.
Exactly.
But I think one thing, because I find Amman super fascinating from the outside, in the same way, and the thing is, nobody else but maybe you and me, in the grand scheme of things, it's a tiny city in a small country that nobody really cares about. But I find the stories within it, like whatever you just mentioned, or different stories of how that kind of society is structured and how we all interact with each other, so immensely fascinating abstractly. It's just begging for someone to write the great Dickensian novel, like a Dickens novel about Amman. But nobody cares about Amman. That's the problem. It's not the center of empire in the way London was in the 19th century for Charles Dickens. But there is something about it that is so unique and interesting. And the closest I found is there's a writer from a different era in the time of Amman called Abdurrahman Munif, who's a Saudi writer, actually.
Abdurrahman Munif.
He wrote a book about Amman he's a novelist. He's كتب شرق المتوسط. He wrote a number of great novels. But he wrote a great novel about Amman called Sirat Medina, about Amman in the 50s, grappling with the death of in the revolution بالعراق اللي هو كمان هاشمي كان الملك. So grappling with that kind of transition and how the city was small. I think, and it's an amazing novel. I highly recommend for anyone, and it's accessible to anyone. Amman, you don't know Amman. It's it's obviously an Arabic novel, but it's
translated as well, probably.
Is it? I'm not sure actually, but probably someone's translated it. But
sure.
But it does capture that Dickensian kind of characters, right? In the same way that. But I think there is a story begging to be written about that West Amman bubble that nobody has kind of done yet, and I wish I had the time to do it, but I don't write fiction like that. And
but to what end? Because there is a decadent part to every city, right? The New York has its cocaine,
and it has a lot more depth.
And Hollywood has its own whatever. Amman, we know. I mean, you and I can talk at length, but other than pointing it out, what would be that takeaway from that book if it were be written? Yeah,
I think there's a few things at the same time. So there is that kind of microcosm of a 1%, which is kind of a universal story, right?
Sure.
But that the delta in values, lifestyle, etc., between that 0.1% or 1%, whatever you want to call it, and the 99%. Is very different to I think anywhere else, any other city I've lived. Disparity not in wealth, in
belief systems, in value systems.
It's bizarro land. I've never seen anything like that anywhere else, even in the rest of the Arab world. That's one thing. And then even within that, because you do have this kind of you have other forces at play, where you have this kind of Levantine elite, this kind of the people in the Levant, in a context of the Arab world, thinking that they are the elite of the Arab world, where they have become now more irrelevant, right? Whereas a center of power shifted towards the Gulf and Gulf Arab hood, if you want to call it that. So that kind of loss of status within that 1% is super interesting, just socially, but also economically. So take another takeaway, the people you grew up with and we grew up with in school, who were in a similar way. A lot of people would have family businesses that generate income, whatever. And usually it's Usually it's like import stuff, so agency work. So I'm the importer for XYZ brand, whether cars automotive, or fashion or
hotels
or whatever it is. But in our economies didn't boom, so those businesses didn't grow much.
They were big enough to
but it was big enough in
to not grow
in 1995. In 1995, right? In the Gulf, the same type of business model, agency for XYZ, became huge because the economy boomed, the population, like and every income
like the
exploded.
Nissan, the dealership in the UAE, for example, as well.
Masalan, whatever, whoever owns that, I think it's Rustam. I don't know who owns it here, but that like did well because like population boomed, also the economy boomed. Like in income, people bought more cars, whatever. But in like the Levant and like somewhere like Jordan, where that same family, the economy never boomed, actually, barely. And then you have intergenerational transfer, meaning the shareholding got diluted. Instead of one person benefiting from the revenue from that or the profits from that business, now it's supporting, instead of supporting 5 people, now supporting the nuclear family, their kids, and now their grandkids.
Yeah.
And so the wealth is diluted. So a lot of people who'd grown up with a sense of privilege and wealth have lost status and grappling with it. And I find it very interesting to watch unfold in a way, because it is a change.
So you're saying the way that it unfolded in Jordan is different than the way it is in the GCC?
In the GCC, the status and wealth continues and is growing. So the profits increasing, people are making more and more money.
Whereas in Jordan,
it's actually
there's no growth. It's created some sort of
it's declining. It's declining actually on a on a per capita basis. If let's say my family owned X, whatever, I don't know, some agency for something, and
so the family grows.
The family grows, and the income is in real terms actually declining, if anything, right?
So less individual
net of inflation,
less individual per capita people have less, basically.
Yeah, and so, but couple that with the fact that the status of that whole part of the world has diminished relative to the rest of the Arab world, and your income has diminished, and your
triple factor,
and whereas before your family name was a thing, like it mattered somehow.
Now it doesn't.
Now nobody cares about it. In Jordan, nobody cares.
Only if you're renewing your passport, I
think nobody cares. Right? Barely. So you have total lack of status. Or diminishment of status. And I do think it's an interesting socio phenomenon playing out live. And that was my other thing, like watching that a little bit. But anyway.
Well, a small snippet, I got to tell you, I don't know if the status family name part is diminished, because I've managed to get myself out of a couple of situations, got away with murder, not so recently, but maybe in the recent, actually also a few times recently. They weren't necessarily too
bad.
Yeah, but they were bad enough that I could have spent, 6 hours waiting for the problem to be resolved, or maybe longer. And the call away was all it took to get me out of their situation in 5 minutes. There is a little bit of still of
I'm
that.
sure that still exists, but I think diminishing over time. For sure, diminishing.
Fair enough.
Compared to 25 years ago. Let's say you got in trouble 25 years ago, I don't know, you got arrested for something.
Yeah.
That would be a non-thing, right? If it was a minor issue, you call someone, I don't think it's like this now.
Before we move on to my next topic, I had to get my hoodie on, which is going to cover my NBA jersey. By the way, I'm wearing Kyrie Irving's NBA jersey. How much are you into basketball?
I went to a big basketball school, university, college basketball rather than...
Which one was it?
Duke University. So it's big.
So Duke, yeah. So Kyrie Irving, for anybody that is actually following the NBA, shot one of the most memorable, if not the most memorable, one of the most memorable buzzer beater, game-winning left-hand skyhook shots against the Nuggets. And it's gonna go down in books. For that's why I'm wearing Kyrie Irving's jersey.
Today?
Yeah, but even though he's in Mavs now, the Dallas, this is his Brooklyn jersey. But now that we got this part out, and since we were talking about comparing the situation in Jordan where we grew up and the socioeconomic disparity and everything else with that, I do want to touch on, we'll probably eventually talk about VC in a second, but the GCC, and this is kind of a little bit of what we discussed last time in that episode that we never published. So let's talk specifically about Saudi Arabia. All eyes are on Saudi, VC, non-oil, GDP, everything. You talked about it, by the way, great episode on Captonomics. Arjun. Great episode. I watched it before on my run before you came. I listened to it rather. And I love having a guest on who's just had another recent episode on, because it gives me a bunch of follow-up questions. So this is like a 3-part question. I don't know how we're going to find a way to tackle all 3 together, but basically, one of the things that I think was not discussed sufficiently in that episode, and I have the curiosity to ask you about it, is the success factors that are needed in order for Saudi to boom. Whether as a startup scene or just as a country.
Just generally,
Right? And I have my opinions on it because I actually run a business that happens to provide talent, high-value talent, to run the country.
Yeah.
So one angle is that. Then there's management consulting, which I know how.
Should I go on a rant about like management consultants?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take a clips part of that episode that I have saved, which we never published, because you were so honest and bold, and I loved it, about management consulting and how much how, obviously it's needed because they buy it a lot in Saudi.
I mean, if there are clients who are paying, so I guess, like who might say like, well,
yeah. And just like the overall kind of culture of Saudi, which is very similar to the GCC, which is that they've been subsidized for a very long time and have gotten used to being butlered. Butlered is a new word I think that I just discovered. Yeah, maybe first, because we discussed, you and Arjun on Captonomics episode, which is a great episode. I encourage anybody listening to this episode to also watch this one. You guys discussed the VC scene, what's going on, what's going well.
Sure.
And, but one part that I think that I was hoping that you guys would talk about, but now we can talk about it, which is competency. And when I talk about competency, I want to be clear. It's both hard skills and soft skills.
Sure, yeah.
Hard skills means like being able to pull up, a PowerPoint presentation and do it yourself as a Saudi. Soft skills are more grit and perseverance and not depending on somebody. Now that you've been exposed to Saudi from stakeholders, LPs, entrepreneurs, all of it.
Sure, yeah.
What do you think is going well, and particularly well, like admirable? And what do you think even better or is being discarded and should be focused on more? And if while you're answering this question, you want to touch on the management consulting part.
I'll do the management consultant rant. That comes natural.
Yeah, let's start with what's going well, even better if.
Yeah, so I think Saudi, zoom out, then we'll zoom in. So like outside of VC, like just macro Saudi. So I think what's interesting about Saudi is that, I mean, we're witnessing an incredible, rare transformation of an entire society towards a very specific, towards a very new way of operating, right? What once was very statist, centrally driven in a way, free market, not necessarily encouraged very much, has now kind of transformed into this, is in the cusp of transforming into a very vibrant type of economy. So I think there's we're just kind of in the middle of it, and you have to think also. We were talking earlier how Saudi has become in the past 20 years, the center of the Arab world, whereas Egypt used to own that place. So whether it was culture, religious thought, modes of economic thinking, bureaucracies, that all emanated from Egypt, right? For the rest of the Arab world.
Yeah.
Up until the 90s, right? That's slowly transitioning to the Gulf, had slowly transitioned to the Gulf throughout the 90s, post the Gulf War, the price of oil going up, etc., and those economies booming. And now Saudi, the GCC, is the undisputed cultural, economic, philosophical, political, you name it, hub of the Arab world. What happens in where these 40 million people live, or so, 45 million people, is what's
Saudi in specific.
No, I mean the GCC generally. Saudi in specific, but the GCC generally. And I would say even within the GCC, we're really talking about 3 countries: Qatar, Saudi most importantly, UAE second, Qatar. So those 3 reverberates across for the 400 to 20 million people in the rest of the Arab world. This is the kind of what happens here is what reverberates everywhere else.
Is it because Bahrain, Oman, and Kuwait are not really plugged into the global scene?
They're just smaller economies, smaller kind of cultural cachet, whatever reason, like they're just not as big plugged in. So, and these economies are all now, these kind of countries, rather, societies are all moving from a very, particularly Saudi, a much more conservative, insular-facing kind of society to one that is embracing the world, embracing rugged individualism in a way, like entrepreneurship, individual thought, a more liberal view of the world. And I mean liberal as in capital L, like a more kind of like, let's maybe move away from a more kind of traditionalist view of how we kind of order our society. And in every moment in history, whenever a society with resources moves towards that, then you have an explosion of opportunity, starting with, the Roman Empire giving citizenship to all its inhabitants that were not actually from Rome. That is what led to the, Pax Romana, the 500 years of of Roman dominance, right? Like that radical idea is like, you know what? Everyone is Roman now. Anyone who lives in the confines of the empire is Roman, whereas it used to be like 5% of the population.
It's like the Dubai story to some extent.
It is like story as old as time. Like whenever, starting with kind of the Roman Empire, it was who gave citizenship. It started with the Roman Republic. It happened gradually, but then it was the Roman Empire that really kind of opened that up. You look at, what made the British Empire great is that idea of embracing all this kind of technological change we talked about that drove the Industrial Revolution and all the ideas around it. So once you open up that kind of liberal thought, I think you have the resources, you have the combination to kind of have a transformative event in your history. And I think we're just at the 1% of it. We're just starting to see it. We're right on the cusp of it. And I think what's so exciting is this is the model for the rest of the Arab world. This is the positive role model eventually for the rest of the Arab world. And so I'm excited, like we're living through this moment. And I think that is super exciting. Whether that's Saudi opening up, whether it's the fact that we live here in Dubai and like so many people from around the world are flocking to Dubai, like, it's becoming the world's, I mean, whether it's a good thing or bad thing, it's becoming one of the world's largest hedge fund centers, for example. Like something is happening, something is percolating, things are changing. Yeah,
and which is what I find to be unfortunate is that whether it's Saudi or Dubai or wherever it is, you have all that dry powder, you have you have all the different pillars and enablers that are required for a startup ecosystem. Let's say Silicon Valley was the best example, or maybe Singapore, or I don't know what.
I mean, Silicon Valley, again, to that kind of like, once you ease the conservatism slightly where you have means, Silicon Valley is born out of like, the hippie movement of the 60s, right? That's basically that kind of free thought percolating with the means of the universities in that area is what kind of unleashed that crazy potential.
Yeah. But I don't know, maybe I'm not being comprehensive in what I'm about to describe right now, but if you think about a startup ecosystem or entrepreneurship or, non-oil GDP, whatever you want to call it, you need regulation that is friendly. You need funding. You need...
the regulation's capping. There's been massive regulatory change.
So what I'm saying is we have everything going for us. Regulatory, it's not restrictive. Dry powder.
Well, I mean, it's moving in the right direction. Still not there yet, but it's absolutely trajectory is positive.
Correct. So regulatory, heading positively. Dry powder available.
Sahih.
Not only is it available, it's available and
could be a lot more, by the way. It's still available more so than like 5 years ago, but I think there could be a 10x fold from here.
Yeah, but I would say it's even it's easier to actually put that money in the bank account of a startup than it is in somewhere like Silicon Valley, because you have less startups competing over that dry powder compared to Silicon Valley. But let's just say there's no shortage of dry powder. Let's leave it as that.
Sure.
Okay. And then the ubiquity of access to information, AI, trendy technologies, and so on. So like we have everything going for us. And again, talking about Saudi specifically, and you mentioned this at one point in your episode on Couchonomics, which is whether you're based out of Saudi or based out of the UAE, it matters less. What matters is the market you're serving, the product you're developing. Where your office is registered is not that.
Doesn't matter really.
Yeah, exactly, right? What I have and I say this because I say this with some level of credibility on the topic, because I have been in the business of providing and augmenting high value talent who are Europeans, Levante, Arabs from Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, whatnot, the US and so on, to help the Saudis in the public and the private sector, to the extent that there's even
supplementing talent, right?
Yeah.
Like you do. You inject I
inject
talent
management consultants that help in many ways. And these consultants, say what you want, but the Saudis will be the first to admit they are more competent in hard and soft skills. Bring the Lebanese or Jordanian kid, a guy or girl, let's say, that went to McKinsey or BCG for 4 or 5 years, and bring that equivalent person from Saudi, put both of them behind the laptop. They'll dish out more slides if that's what you're looking for. I'm not saying slides is ever the right measure.
Therein lies your first
No, that's not necessarily the measure of success. But what I'm saying is there's grit. There is work ethic. We disagreed
last time on this. I know there is. I can see what you're saying, but I have seen plenty Saudis and other GCC nationals who have an immense drive, grit, and determination to kind of succeed.
Exist. I'm not saying they don't exist.
Yeah, it's not. So even like the idea that if you get like a guy from wherever X non-GCC country and you put them this place, then they are kind of somehow ingrained in an ingrained way, like much more effective. I think that's not true. I think it's self-fulfilling when you keep on importing the kind of management and it's not about like the expat, not the expat. It's the idea of bringing someone from outside the organization, and this is true of any organization. It doesn't matter what it is. Once you import part-time talent, you immediately like create a principal agent problem in your organization, meaning the person who's kind of putting together the strategy or the project or whatever it is
delegating.
Yeah, that you're delegating it to somebody who's not living or dying by the organization. It's going to be gone in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or
there's no accountability.
24 weeks, and
they have no skin in the game.
Yeah, and exactly, they've got no skin in the game. And then you add to that the fact that consultants are I think management consultants, when they enter that profession, they learn a lot of like very great skills, as you mentioned, like analytical thinking, hard work, etc. However, there is a tipping point, and I don't know when that tipping point happens, 5 years, 6 years, 4 years, at which point there is for lack of a better word, institutional cynical thinking creeps in, where everything is distilled down to kind of like 100-slide deck that is totally devoid from operational reality and much more about kind of how do you rationalize a problem that may look good and you solve it in a way that kind of is logically consistent but may not be applicable. And I think we have here in the Arab world and in the GCC generally, government, non-government, a problem with this. And the best thing we can do is to kick out the management consultants. I mean, they add nothing to us, really. Yeah.
Hold that thought about kicking out management consultants, because that's a topic.
Or significantly change the way you use them.
Yeah, so this is a double-edged sword. We'll come back to it. We've discussed it briefly, and we're going to pick up from where we left off. By the way, dishing out slides and the number of slides for me is not a measure of competence.
But you used it. I mean, that's very telling that you used it as the example of productivity.
The only reason I use it is because that is the measure by which Saudi clients still measure level of effort and whether the money that they're spending is worth it, is because they still look at how big a deck is, right? So but the truth is, making a shorter deck is far harder than making a long deck.
I mean, making no decks is better than like anything else.
That's what
actually.
I'm saying. So making no decks,
like making something happen 100%. Matters much more.
But my point is about like, what I was trying to say is, if today you have a client that wants a 50 slide deck, right?
Yeah,
you will have a 5-year McKinsey, Lebanese, Jordanian, Egyptian. Put that 50 slide deck,
or Italian, or Spanish, or whatever, or
all of these
British
things,
or whatever.
All of those nationalities will put a 50 slide deck if that's what the client wants, faster and better than a Saudi 5-year BCG McKinsey experience consultant will.
See, I'm disagreeing with the premise.
Right? We can disagree with the premise that we even need 50 slides. Exactly, but I'm just saying, if the client says, I'm telling you what to do, I'm paying you for what I want.
So you asked what could be done better, like in like the transformation of GCC.
Let's talk about Saudi. I don't want to talk GCC.
No, but they're similar, right? Like the interrelated transformation.
No,
some
I actually
faster
think there
than
are
others.
Slight differences between UAE nationals and Saudis.
Obviously, there are different people, different countries, different history, different. But I'm saying there is a thematic thing of reliance on imported management consultants, right, across these countries, right, in private and public sectors.
Call it. It's a category of things. It's not just the importance of high value talents, which are management consultants. It's the reliance of somebody else to execute while you delegate. Now you can call this right in all different capacities: blue collar, white collar, you name it. And to the extent that this continues, and it's not something that you can give somebody a pill or switch a button. Culturally, there have been years of being used to being subsidized and being used to. You're not going to expect a country like Saudi, with all the intelligence and all the opportunity and all the funding, to have the kind of. You will see grit and perseverance and hustle in a sample of handful of entrepreneurs. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying the percentage of those that you have encountered as a Nuwa Capital GP, right? The percentage of them is so low compared to.
And I think there are more of that than you think there is.
Then why are they still buying management consultants?
This is the thing. I think it's not about the availability of local talent or competent. I don't think it's about that. Maybe there is a bit of that. Like in every place, you can use it to plug a hole if you have a hole in an organization. So my issue with the management consulting use is not, which speaks to the problem, is not not that there's no use for them at all. There is a use,
but
which is plugging holes.
Okay,
and I think it's more about it's about, again, back to this idea that if you want to build greatness, you have to have a sense of empowerment to be enabled to deliver on a vision, whatever the vision is, whatever the strategy is. I think we're in the middle of moving away, and it will happen, and mark my words, away from where people will be empowered enough to say, I don't need McKinsey to rubber stamp my strategy. I will do it myself, and I will live or die by that. This kind of leadership level, CEOs, whatever you want to call them, that level. I think there is a room for management consultants, which is, look, I don't have the resources today to do some research on X topic to kind of land on a question. Can you do this discrete project for me? That's the proper use for a management consulting firm. I have this problem. I want to solve it like this. Can you substantiate this research? Thank you very much. This is the numbers I have. Done.
And my resources are already busy with their other work.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good use. But I think where this goes a bit awry is that you have them. It's like, I actually don't know what I want to do. I have no, and I'm worried to kind of put a stake in the ground to say I want to do X, Y, Z. So I'm going to import, BCG, experts. McKinsey, whatever, so-called experts, whatever. I mean, I don't know how much these guys are really experts. When they're like, one day they're kind of designing like sewage systems, and the next morning they're designing like middeware banking systems. It's just nonsense. But anyway, like
let's give them the benefit of that they know it all.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of the discussion.
Yeah. So we import. And the reason that it's done, it's because it's safe. It's the same thing. Like, why does in our part of the world also, it's the same kind of phenomenon. Why does SaaS not grow?
Software as a service,
startup SaaS, it doesn't grow so quickly. Like, there's no mass adoption because it's a similar thing that happens elsewhere in the world, but we have it more acutely, which is a cultural phenomenon, which is the thing they say, nobody gets fired for using Microsoft. So if you're a CTO and you do a mass adoption of Microsoft as your kind of main enterprise software, and it screws up, you're not going to get fired for using Microsoft. But if you take a bet on like XYZ, like startup software, like SaaS platform, and it goes wrong, your boss is going to be like, what the hell? Like, why do you choose? Of course it went wrong. Like, who is this company? And like, you're fired.
Sure.
So it's that kind of culture of like, playing it safe is why you go with the McKinsey, the BCG, or the quote unquote
it's like a
experts.
token of insurance.
Yeah, it's just like a kind of like a, I'm just protecting myself kind of thing. But if people are allowed to fail a bit more, which I think is happening, I think this is starting to happen, and take real ownership, I think the use of the consultants, the imported resource, will be just that. I'm plugging a hole. I'm not. Yeah. It's not driving my entire thing.
Are you talking about the startup scene, the early stage startup scene, or are you talking about Saudi?
Startups can't afford McKinsey or whatever.
Okay, so if you're talking about the public sector
or private sector, big private sector companies,
there's no private sector in Saudi, man.
No, I disagree with that. I think there's actually the largest private sector in the Arab world is in Saudi. It's a significant driver.
Can you give me an example aside of like the family offices?
I mean, that's private sector.
Okay, but like Aramco alone is like 60% of the country's GDP, right? If not more.
I mean, Marai, مثلا, is the manages the world's largest integrated dairy farm. So it's like Faisali owns it. There's the second largest integrated dairy farm.
Yeah, but I mean, there's such a tangled up private public sector foot in one world and another. Okay, let's not.
There is more. Let me put it this way.
They're not very mutually exclusive. The
right,
private
and my career has been mostly in the Middle East, let's say. The sophistication of the private sector in the Arab world has been deepest I've ever seen in Saudi compared to anywhere else.
What is
in
the
Middle East?
The
sophistication of the private sector business class is the deepest I've ever seen in Saudi compared to the rest of the Arab world.
Sophistication in terms of like they are very
strategic thinking, like the way they build their business, think about their businesses. I can't point to somewhere else.
Because I don't have much experience in the fully private sector of Saudi, what I'll tell you,
and I don't have much public sector exposure. On the flip side, so I can't speak much for.
And they are the biggest buyers of consulting. I'll tell you, it's cutthroat.
In what sense?
In that they can't. The whole like we're getting McKinsey or whatever consulting just in case or to be on the safe side. That's not the case. They bring them because they really can't rely on the human capital that exists around them, and they have no shifting goalposts. And these goalposts are being set by the top of the pyramid. And if they don't get there, it's not like if they lose their jobs, they're on the streets, right? Like nobody in Saudi ever will be on the streets. But whether it's status, whether it's their sense of accomplishment, if you're a minister, a deputy minister, anybody in that system, and you are expected to achieve a top-down goal of I need X achieved in 5 years because Vision 2030. The reason why you bring consultants is because even with the best consultants, and the thing is here's where it gets a little bit kind of ironic, is that the budgets are there. Get consultants if you need to, and they get so much more consultants than they need to get, and it starts to have a counter effect because the more consultants you bring, the less efficient you get.
I mean, great way not to solve any problem is to like throw a bunch of consultants at something.
I mean, if you bring 2-3 consultants, maybe you get there faster. But bring 20 and 30 consultants, you're gonna get there like much slower, right? But what I'm trying to say, there's no mercy in the public sector in Saudi Arabia.
Maybe I need that exposure. I have some investors or government like investors who I've never dealt with a consultant. I have dealt my experience. I can tell you only my experience. I have a few public sector focused like investors. They are deeply. I mean, I'm not just saying they're my investors, but like I've seen the way they look at us, the way they invest, the way they there's no consultant. I've never seen a consultant anywhere. It's just them. They are very thoughtful. They are methodical. They are diligent. All Saudis.
And by the way,
thoughtful. I think they're there.
Rabbuna Allah and credit where credit is due, right? The intelligence, the theoretical knowledge of frameworks and how things should go and so on is there. What I think is missing, and it's not missing because they're lazy or whatever you want to call it, is that there's been decades of dependency on somebody else to do the hard work.
I don't see it. Like even I'm only speaking anecdotally from my experiences. I've just not seen it. Like what you're referring to.
Yeah,
I know it exists.
Maybe the private sector is different than the public sector.
Even my public sector interactions are with highly sophisticated, hardworking, very thoughtful, like deep thinking, like, you know, very hardworking Saudi nationals who, like, you know, are, you know, they hold us accountable, they look at us deeply.
Hardworking relative to what we call hardworking, Khaled, يعني لما نقول إحنا the guys that work 12 hours a day.
Yes. This is why, like, there's a disconnect.
Maybe different perspective. I mean, that's why.
This has been, you know, like all the woke people, this is my truth. This is my how I live my
I'm
thing.
happy to hear it because, you know,
and the private
I see things from my vantage point, and I still see a lot of dependency on Saudis in power, expecting those they pay a lot of money to do the work that they can do, perhaps, but for good or bad reason they can't, either because they claim or are too busy, or because they can't, even though they claim they can, or whatever it is. And so what ends up happening is a ton of spending on consulting because there's somebody else that's willing to do the work that this Saudi either can't do it and claims can, or won't do it because they don't want to.
And I think it's, again, I think it's not about can or can't. I think it's more about, or willing or not willing. I think it's more about feeling like I am protecting my downside. So I bring in the expert. I think it's more driven by. So I don't know. Yani.
Are you saying they could do? Are you saying if? And you said this before, so let me reiterate it and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Are you saying that Saudis can get to exactly where they need to get without the consultants if they were left without consultants?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
No,
I think they could.
I love short answers because
I think they could hire that talent in-house and have that talent be accountable and sit on top of it, because you may not have just the manpower.
So there's no competency issue.
I don't think so. No.
So
it's not about competency. I think you can. It's not. My issue is with the management consulting, part-time consulting model, not like whether that the talent exists or not. My point is, it's the way going about it. You should bring the people in-house. You sit on top of the person. You make them deliver. Wherever you find, like it's a job market, like any job market in the world.
So one way to do it is to say you're not allowed to get consultants anymore. Deal with it. إجا هيك a new decree from top down that says you're only allowed to hire Saudis.
I don't think it's about hiring Saudis. It's not about Saudis, not Saudis.
Okay, you can hire expats. You can hire Saudis. You're not allowed to get those external MBB tier 1 consultants. And here's Vision 2030 goals. Now, get to work, get there. You can't get consultants. This is a bit of a reductive scenario description.
Yeah, it is quite reductive.
But just for the sake of the example, are you saying that more or less you believe...
Let me give you an analogy. Yeah. Like, let's think about all because I come from like, you know, startup or like company formation world, and I don't really understand. I worked in the public sector for a short time, so I can tell you about my experience in the public sector and using management consultants, but I'll give it to you from a different way. No great companies have been built by, no great achievements have been made by like importing management consultants. Like because of, very simply, back to that principal agent disconnect. So I'm colored by my experience. When I worked in the public sector in Abu Dhabi, okay, which was, you know, I don't think of it as public sector, but it was actually the government.
2454.
Yeah, it's actually owned by the government. Yeah. You know, that was the use of the consultant, was to kind of like settle, like, oh, let's like kind of figure out how we use it, right? Like but you could never rely on it. And you could see with the consultants how the consultants will play back to you anything you want to hear. They'll rationalize anything you want to hear.
If you pay them to do that, they'll do that.
And it's just, this is the crux of the issue, right? Like, it's not about the consultants have competency and the in-house teams don't, or vice versa.
Their incentives
are perverse.
You know, they need to collect. So whatever they got to do to collect, they'll do.
And the incentives are immensely perverse. Yeah. And it's not, nobody's a good person or a bad person. It's not, you know, it's just about
incentive alignment.
The incentive alignment is off. Yeah. And like, that's why, you know, Apple was not created by a bunch of guys at McKinsey building a company.
But I'll tell you, the thing is, you're right about that. But if a system accepted that it will always have consultants as part of it, like I think Saudi is not using consultants for the next 5 to 10 years, and then they're gonna get on their feet. I think there are some. I think what makes Saudi a unique market when it comes to demand for management consulting is that it has come to terms with the fact that they'll always need them. And it's not only to ensure that they get to where they need to get there, that's part of it, but because either they don't want to fully take the risk that they're going to have to rely entirely on their own people and their expats that they hire to get there. So the budget for consulting, I think if I don't know how it works in Saudi, if they sit down and they allocate budget to defense or whatever, there is a budget for consulting that will always be there, and that will probably always increase, and it will not be cut down. I hope that's not the case, because I would love nothing more than to see any country, Saudi or otherwise, just becoming self. I just think culturally there are decades of
I think
dependency on others to help.
I think you have.
I'm just 8 years in the business, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think you see this, but allow me to say, I think you are colored slightly by that, what I was talking about earlier, kind of like a sense of Levantine superiority, because because remember I was talking about we're losing our status to the Gulf, and we sort of internalize our thinking as thinking we are somehow have the grit, or deeper thinkers, etc., or build bigger businesses, or have more hardworking. And I see Saudi founders, entrepreneurs in tech, and also old founders who built crazy businesses 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when there was nothing, 60 years ago. And I'm in awe of these guys, and I think they've done a remarkable job. And I just as good as any,
I'll tell you, a big difference is that you are in the entrepreneurship
maybe I'm
world.
Colored by that, so I meet.
Entrepreneurs are naturally full of grit and more.
I don't mean I have a lot of Saudi families or individuals who are investors with me who are, and this is gonna sound self-serving because I'm sticking up for this because but this is my reality.
We have our different vantage points, but
the fact that they have built amazing companies, I'm not talking about tech. This is 50 years ago. In the hardest of environments, and they've done it, and they've succeeded, and they've pushed forward, and it's worked. And I meet these people all the freaking time, and I am really inspired by them.
Okay, I'll tell you something. One thing that Saudi is doing great at, regardless of who's behind it, is the progressiveness, especially women's rights, literacy, empowerment. All of that is heading upwards. It's great. You can't be happy about it. Politics aside, Yemen, Lebanon, Palestine, let's not get there, right? Because that, if I want to be honest, I might get into murky water, so I don't want to get there. But what I'll tell you is the following, man. As somebody who has been in the business of augmenting talent to Saudi public sector clients, either directly myself through my company or through consulting firms, the standards have gotten lower and lower. So there was a time when I can only send someone to augment a team if that individual truly had the expertise in the industry, truly was willing to work the hours, truly was capable, and all of these things, and so on. Today, with the exception of the last 2 months, because I don't know what's going on in the last 2 months, some weird seasonal shift, I can't explain, but aside of the last 2 months, the last 2 years, stick somebody in a suit with a tie and have him or her make PowerPoint slides, and they'll charge twice the daily rate that previously 5 years ago. Yeah. So what that tells me is that the level of the need for just somebody to come and do the work that isn't even that difficult has increased. The rates have increased. The scales have tilted big time towards, we need even more of those management consultants. And what does that mean? Either there aren't enough Saudis to do the work, or there's not enough trust by the big stakeholders in Saudi,
or the amount of work has just increased tremendously
as well, right? But Saudi is a big market, so there's no shortage of investment and training programs and all that to make sure that the youth get up to speed so that they can do the work. Yet the standards of حتى بقول لك على مستوى to the extent that what it used to be an associate at Kearney or Wyman or McKinsey, when I used to be in consulting 10 years ago or more, is now a principal at Kearney. يعني a principal today at Kearney is equal to an associate when I was at Kearney.
Sure.
In terms of responsibility, maturity, and skills and everything else.
But why do you like attribute that to Saudi? Isn't that a comment on Kearney?
No, because demand is so high that they're willing to stick a even today's that's what I'm trying to say. At one point there was some synchronization between levels and demand. The principal was doing business development, the associate was doing slides. Today you have principals doing slides. That's what I'm saying. The need for
فاهمك.
I tell you, somebody from the industry. And on the one hand, for me, it's good business because I can just like stick anybody with a suit and a tie on who's willing to take the job and so on. On the other hand, it just tells me that they're not able to keep up to speed with growing the talent domestically or whatever.
No, I think it's more. I don't think it's a competency thing as much as like the number of kind of potential projects has increased exponentially.
Maybe the demand is just way too high.
The demand is just way too high.
The targets are way too aggressive.
That's my guess. But again, Anna, I don't have that vantage point of looking at like, what is the supply and demand for this stuff and where's the use cases, what's the data. And I just live within my world, and within my world, this idea that there aren't locals who have grit, hard work, sophisticated, like I just find that false. Like that's not my experience. Yeah.
Fair enough, sir. And that's why I like to have you on, because you have a better perspective on the private sector in Saudi than I do, and I'm more public sector connected. I do have a couple of other questions, but we are 2 hours in.
2 hours in. Almost doing well.
I will, since you are a venture capitalist, this interview was meant to talk to you as my friend and reminisce, and we've done all of those things well, and I'm glad, I'm super happy that you're here. But I think I should leave room for one VC related question. So I will wrap this episode with that question, okay? Have you heard, maybe you have or haven't, have you heard of Zebra or Camel startups? Has that phrase come across in your vicinity whatsoever? So Zebra and Camel startups are startups that are willing to, or are able to, like camels, sustain surviving and operating and making money without too much capital, like camels can survive on low water.
Okay.
And Zebra startups similarly, but in a different way. Black and white. Zebras are black and white. They are for impact and for positive impact.
Impact-driven startups.
Yeah, but also, so that's the black part. The white part is that they also make money.
You mean you mean like social impact or whatever? So
but also profit-making social impact companies, right?
Yeah.
And then both of those Zebra or Camel startups are usually, when discussed, are versus unicorn, Silicon Valley, scale at all costs, burn capital.
So I like a lot one of those animals, and I really don't like the other one.
Okay. But then let me try to first categorize them into two categories, and then you can dissect them. So you have the Silicon Valley mentality, which is burn capital, get a startup to spend 7 years of not making money until they eventually become the next Amazon.
I'm not sure that's always the Silicon Valley, but in the past, recently it's been, or up until a couple of years ago,
the classic Silicon Valley
mid-2010s, I would say, mentality.
The kind of
burn, grow,
burn capital, great idea,
raise
money,
grow,
don't see any profits for 8-9 years. It's okay, keep raising at higher valuations, and maybe one day.
Where that comes from, by the way, not to go on a tangent,
where
that came from, because that's not really the case historically, but became big in the early 2010s with like zero interest rates, but it was built on the Amazon model, because Amazon basically very famously went public early, and for years and years and years
hemorrhaging cash,
never turned a profit, and was punished by Wall Street.
Bezos has a great interview with Jay Leno on that, by the way. Maybe you've seen it.
No.
Okay, so it's about exactly.
And they just get hammered because they but the strategy with Amazon was, look, we can turn a profit, but we're going to continue to expand because we need to increase our categories, increase our logistics, because we're growing and we want to grow. And when we want to turn a profit, we can turn a profit. And we're adding all these ancillary services like AWS and, they were doing a million things, right? Like building out all the fulfillment centers everywhere.
Yeah.
But we know that if we do X, Y, Z, we can turn a profit. And فعلا, they could turn a profit. Like when they chose to kind of like ease into it, they did turn, and they're massively profitable business. What a lot of startups...
Do they pay dividends, or is it profitable because of growth and share price?
Today it's profitable, quite a profitable business, like Amazon, very profitable business. But driven disproportionately by AWS. But anyway, it is a very profitable business.
Yeah.
But for I can't remember the time frame, like over 10, 15 years public, no profits. A lot of startups took that learning, or Silicon Valley took that learning. It's like, you know what? I don't need to turn a profit. I just need to grow. And when I become dominant, somehow, miraculously, I'm going to become profitable. And that was the wrong learning from the Amazon story, because Amazon actually could turn a profit at any point, almost at any point in that journey. But
they chose to just reinvest.
They chose to do it. Whereas, and they didn't not turn a profit because they were subsidizing the consumer. They were never subsidizing the consumer, Amazon. They were just driving their OPEX towards growth.
Yeah.
It's not like they had negative gross margins so that they could attract consumers. But that was never the strategy.
You had WhatsApp selling without any cash to Facebook, and then you also had similar, what's it called? Twitch selling to Amazon as well.
But that aside, I'm saying like in the 2010s, late 2000s, into the 2010s, a lot of the strategy of a lot of businesses was like, oh, Amazon did it. Subliminally, that's what people were channeling. But instead of like diverting resources and capital towards growth initiatives, all they were really doing was just slashing prices. They're cutting margin to subsidize consumers, to attract consumers, with this idea, once we have the consumer, it'll be so sticky, we can increase the prices and we can sell them additional services and it's going to work. And in a lot of cases, that's not what Amazon did. So the wrong lesson was learned effectively. And for a lot of companies, it didn't work out. For a lot of companies, they were able to make that transition today, like Uber, and where they but it was very painful. Very, very painful. You have companies like Carvana, Kazoo, etc. Like so many companies. And I think that's the difference. So like that's where there was a wrong lesson. But there is today a reversion to that mean of actually need to build a real business. And if you're going to burn cash, you burn it for growth, not for just pure subsidy. Just capturing consumer at a subsidy and then you magically increase prices in the future means the consumers are just going to pay it. That's just not. You have to actually build value. Your gross margin is the biggest indicator of real value in any business. It signifies whether someone is willing to pay for something at a price higher than what you're able to supply it at.
How much it is to acquire that customer, the subscriber acquisition cost.
So like that's more the contribution margin, where it's like also the customer acquisition cost and all that in. But I mean, just a very simple on the product level. If I need to continuously subsidize my product to attract consumers, then my consumer base, my product has very little value, a very little value proposition to the consumer.
A very short-term gratification.
Whatever, it's not that important to me. Like this thing, like 5-minute delivery or 10-minute delivery.
Yeah.
Like notoriously very thin margins. Like, do you really need your Doritos in 5 minutes versus like half an hour?
Yeah.
Like if you have to like really subsidize it to deliver it, like what's the point?
Yeah, you're just getting you're just proving some short-term value add or competitive advantage that is not sustainable. It's a little bit of what Uber did at some point, actually.
Yeah, but they made the transformation because they were supposed to be like a mass product for the people, for everyone. But actually, they're now not luxury, but they're like a premium product, right? They're not like They haven't supplanted
بس as a VC انت اليوم إذا بيجيك a startup that says hey Khaled, here we are a startup fully tech or tech enabled, we're not gonna make any money in the next 5 years, but we will eventually, and here's our vision and story. Then you have another startup that comes and says, hey, Khaled, we're going to make money from day one. And we may choose to reinvest those retained earnings to grow. But we're bringing cash in. Our business, our P&L is a viable one from day one.
Yeah.
Do you have a clear-cut answer, or is it always like depends?
Depends.
It depends.
It depends because like it's really a function of why are you loss making, like in the first scenario, and number two, are you like leaving opportunities on the table in scenario two? So I think it really depends. And like one early cheat sheet thing is like margin analysis. Is a great way, unit economics, great way to understand what this business is and where it's going.
Very cool. I have a feeling that the world is moving towards more. You need to show cash as early as possible. Otherwise, unless you're onto something, and I'm with you to go on cloud number 9 and smoke the same shit you're smoking. Then most startups that I feel like, even in Silicon Valley and in other developed worlds, there seems to be a desire towards demonstrable
like a real business, not just like subsidies like covered by like this kind of like tech aura, which means like you have valuable business. Like, no, build something valuable that somebody wants to use, that you can sell at a profit. Very simple. Very simple like dukkani عندك, like supermarket, you sell at a profit.
Which is why, one of the things I wanted to do, but at the expense of not running more than 2 hours into our podcast, because that is the limit I usually have, is to talk to you about my own business and have a heke for the first time. Maybe this should be a podcast show of its own, like a little Shark Tank podcast where you bring in a startup idea to talk to you about the startup. And
we can do that. I like that, actually.
Look, I have people knocking on my door to buy my company. But I am a service company, not a product company. So any deal means I need to stick around for 4 years.
Big earnout. Big focus on the earnout.
It is an 8-figure business, so it's
sell an earnout and do the next thing.
Okay, can you elaborate what that means?
Any service-driven business, the acquirer most likely, we're giving a cheat sheet to your acquirer now, but like will be like heavily focused on making sure that the talent, even in a product-driven business rather than a service-driven business, you always want to retain the talent for a set period of time.
Sure.
And you do that by saying, okay, let's say I'm valuing the business at $100 million. You get 30 upfront or 40 upfront,
so that's
and 60 by hitting targets.
That's a current discussion.
And with a service business, that equation is heavy on the deliver over the next 3 times versus what I pay you upfront.
The needle moves somewhere.
So if it's a very product-driven thing, if it's like WhatsApp,
this is a very
example,
service-driven thing.
Yeah, it's more upfront versus the other way around.
It's about me providing the service as Yazan.
So I think you as Yazan bite the bullet. You earn out for 3 years.
Give away my freedom.
You
for
negotiate
4 years.
the period because it affords you the ultimate freedom after.
So that's what it comes down to.
It's a chronological. It's a time your trade-off.
Yeah, and I
trade-off some 3 years or whatever, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, for much more freedom later versus a bit more freedom
closing
today.
Down the private practice.
Yeah.
And I think what I'll do is as of now, as of March, what is it? March, what's the day today? March 19. As of March 19, I have, but I change my mind every day because that's a sort of what ambivalent people do. I decided that I'm just going to do my podcast, play with my dog, do my thing, and run my business on autopilot until it fades to black, pun intended for Metallica.
That's a Metallica reference embedded in there.
Rather than have to put my head down and slave for 4 years in order to maximize value, even though it's a value punt.
But no, you slave for 3 years so that you never ever have to even slave at all ever.
Yeah, but man, you know what? I don't even know if I'm going to live for the next 3 years. I don't have any reason to not think I will, but I think something about I like my freedom too.
But you still have to slave a bit now. So we're saying increase your...
Nothing about how I need to slave that now compares to what it means to slave when I have to report.
Sure, when you have a boss and you have a thing.
I haven't had a boss in like 10 years. And I can't tell you, it may have not served me well. I got fat. I picked up a bunch of negative habits. Something about having
freedom.
A boss or lack of freedom is good because it means you need
structure and gotta get up in the morning.
But still, even with all of that, I would rather maximum freedom over. And by the way, like it's not like I'm far away from financial freedom. Inshallah, ya Rabbi, one day. So it's not like I need the money. Like, but if I do, of course, it will be a different discussion. But as of today, look, these discussions are still going on. Like the 2-3 buyers that I'm talking to are waiting for me, and they send me follow-up emails and like send us your data
counter
room.
offer or
no, your data room.
Yeah,
your VAT. They're ready. It's there. It's just that I know that the moment I submit them and they send me an LOI,
you're gonna go for it.
Yeah, man, because we're talking about an 8-figure deal here.
Take it, man.
So can we sit and talk? There's 2 conversations off the podcast that we need to talk about. One is this, where I would like to pick your brain on, and the second one is a startup idea unrelated to me. That is something.
صح, you were telling me.
Yeah, we'll talk about it separately.
Yeah.
So for now, again, in the interest of not putting our listeners rather to sleep. If those who are still awake. I just want to say...
I'll be amazed if anyone listens for a full 2 hours.
Nobody's expected to, by the way. When I do these 2-hour podcasts, first of all...
pick and choose the interesting parts.
No, well, that's the whole point. First of all, you think Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or all the top podcasters who do 2-3 hour podcasts, or some of them go for 5-6 hours, by the way. You think anybody ever sits there and says... The point is that they allow themselves to talk without tension and having to keep their eyes on the timer.
Yeah.
They talk relaxed. They make clips. And then, believe it or not, even with my stupid podcast, which is not like Joe Rogan or whatever, you'll be surprised about how many people watch the whole thing.
The whole thing?
The whole thing.
The whole hour and a half, Khaled, 2 hours?
Bro, I'm telling you, I mean, again, I'm... Okay, the only thing, I'm a top voice on LinkedIn, which is pretty cool because they give that badge only on... subjective basis, not based on your followers like Instagram's blue check marks and so on. So I'm proud of that. But I have like 300 subscribers on YouTube, but I haven't really done any marketing or anything. But the point I'm trying to get at is when you get a stranger that you've never heard of, or even a friend that says, hey, by the way, on hour 1 minute 45, you said this and that. I was like, bro, hold on, give me a second. You watched until
minute 1 hour 45.
So some people do, right? And that's very gratifying. And that's what's
the stranger, especially,
or a friend for that matter, man. Like again, I won't even watch my own podcast for 2 hours or so. When we talk about like what's gratifying in life and definition of success, and especially after you've made money in life and all of that, one comment of that sort will make your day, not because they listen to you and like ego heke. It means that you were discussing something interesting enough for someone that they decided to continue listening. Forget it that it's me and I'm the host and the guest is great and all of that. Like I've moved the level of intelligence or insight or enlightenment of somebody around, even if it's just one person. And something about that is like worth having a toast on if we were
100%.
On that point, I want to say thank you for being one of the guests that epitomize that experience. Oof. And I appreciate you coming, and I can't wait to have you on again. I'm sure it's not going to be the last. I don't know if there's anything else you want to wrap up with before I...
No, I think we're good. I think we went on for a good
Khaled
time.
Talhouni, one of my very good friends from high school, and the one of the general partners of Nuwa Capital. Check him out on what's your URL, or how do people find you?
Just Google Khaled Talhouni.
Google Khaled Talhouni, Talhouni with an I.
Talhouni with an I, Khaled with an E.
KHALED, Khaled Talhouni, TALHOUNI.
There we go.
Yeah, that's how you find Khaled Talhouni on LinkedIn. Nuwa Capital is his VC, previously Amman Baccalaureate, one of the top VCs in the country and the region. And as we discovered today, and as I've known him, a brilliant man altogether. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Habibi. More success to you and your team as well.
Same to you.
All right, that's a wrap.
Yeah, take care.